Welcome to Comics on a Pyre, a channel to have a meaningful conversation over movies, life, books, and shows, and maybe just a spot to spend time BSing over comics. If you like your entertainment with a bit of substance, then you, my vagabond friend, have come to the right tavern. Tether your horse by the post and come right on in and warm yourself by the fire. Tap that subscribe button, and for the next few minutes, my fellow George Carlin reprobate, lend me your ear. Tales of Suspense, issue number 39, published in March of 1963. The first appearance of not only Tony Stark, but the Iron Man prototype suit. Man, how the classics look so different than what they look like now. I mean, if you think about it, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, and the Hulk, with a few minor changes here and there, look pretty much the same. It has only been old Shellhead that has gone through dozens of modifications. And it seems right, as technology improves, so should the armor. And then there is the specification of each endeavor, Hydro Armor, which is designed for salvage missions at the bottom of the deepest seas. Stealth Armor, MK4, an armor that uses light bending and holographic technologies to appear invisible. Space Armor, MK3, designed by Stark to enable him to travel into outer space. And let's not forget everyone's favorite suit, Hulkbuster Armor, MK2. Do I even need to explain what this armor is for? Smash! All these armors that I just mentioned, though, can thank their existence to the Mark I, the bulky, cumbersome suit that appears in Tales of Suspense number 39. Now, Tales of Suspense, if you don't know, was an anthology comic that was published by Marvel and ran from 1959 to 1968. It began as a science fiction anthology series that served to showcase the great comic book illustrators such as Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, and Don Heck. It eventually went on to feature superheroes like Captain America and Iron Man during the Silver Age of comics before, believe it or not, changing its title altogether to Captain America issue number 100, published in April of 1968. Just a fun fact, but that, as they say, is for another video. The reason why I bring this up is because, as you may know, the same thing happened to Spider-Man. His first appearance was not in the Amazing Spider-Man number 1, but Amazing Fantasy issue 15, published a year before in August of 1962. Amazing Fantasy, previously known as Amazing Adult Fantasy, and no, not that kind of adult fantasy, get your mind out of the gutter, was like Tales of Suspense, as they were both anthology comic series that explored short stories concerning sci-fi and monsters. In the comics, you will not get just one story, but 3 or so, lasting about 10 pages each. I guess the publisher at the time thought these comics would sell better because the reader got to experience different stories and not just one. If the reader did not like the first story, he could simply skip on to the next, hopefully liking that one. And therefore, the reader will not feel as though they were cheated out of their money. This seems also a good way to test the new ideas and characters. If the reader liked them, they would write about them and develop a following. After a while, if a character grew popular enough, they would get their own series, like The Mighty Thor and Journey into Mystery 83. See what I mean? Though this was not the case with the Incredible Hulk and the Fantastic Four back in the early stages of Marvel. Each of these characters debuted with their own comics. I guess Dan had more confidence in them being a smash hit. But anyway, back to Iron Man. As I was reading the issue concerning his first appearance and origin story, I noticed stark comparisons to the movie of the same name released in 2008, starring Robert Downey Jr. It is obvious Lee took inspiration from the events that were happening at the time this comic hit the stands, but the movie updated them to fit current times. Let's start with the comic. During its debut, the Vietnam War was going on, taking place in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. It was mainly a war between North and South Vietnam, but each individual faction had their own backers. These backers were the antithesis of each other. The South had the United States, South Korea, Philippines, Australia, and other anti-communist allies. This group, since Tony is American, is obviously the faction that was helping him win the war. The North is backed by China, Russia, and other communist allies. The group is represented by antagonists of the story, Wang Chu, a red guerrilla tyrant who captures Tony and held him hostage, forcing him to make weapons for the warlord. When in fact, as we all know, Tony designed his armor for himself to use it to escape. Now, in the 2008 movie To Represent Modern Times, he is captured and imprisoned in a cave somewhere in Afghanistan by a terrorist group who calls themselves the Ten Rings. In the comics, the events take place in Vietnam. The comic and the movie also differ, and that is the armored breastplate that keeps Tony Hart ticking in the comic, and not an arc reactor implanted in his chest like in the movie. Also, the comic doesn't portray Stark as a weapons manufacturer per se, like in the movie. In the comic, he is a scientist that manipulates transistors to create great feats. And it is a tripwire explosive that's set by the guerrillas that cause the explosion, that damages his heart and not one of his own missiles. Even though this is a modification of the story, I thought it was an overall improvement to the retelling of his origin, because it was Tony's creation that come back to haunt him. Therefore, he sees the consequences of his own actions, and he feels the pain that he has had a hand in inflicting on others. A tale of having one's own chickens coming home to roost. One of the things that stays the same, though, is Yen Sen, the fellow captive that helps Tony Stark build the suit. Sadly, he dies in both versions, trying to buy Tony time for his armor. The other thing I realized when reading this issue is Stan Lee's fascination with science. Now bear with me. Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four is a scientist. He gains his powers through cosmic rays when traveling through space. Bruce Banner is a scientist who works on a nuclear bomb and gains his powers from gamma rays. And even though Peter Parker, though he is now nowhere near the genius of the previous two, is still an amateur, you guessed it, scientist. When he gets bitten by a radioactive arachnid that gives him his powers. Now, the two differences of Tony when it comes to the other scientists is his wealth. He is rich, famous, a genius, and every woman wants him. A big difference from the other three. But also the second thing that separates him from the other three is that he is basically human with no superpowers. And to top it all off, he is even handicapped. Because he needs the technology to live. Without it, he would most assuredly die, making him dependent on the creation and truly a modern day Frankenstein of sorts. Well, I think that's enough for this installment. If you like this video, then check out my comic book YouTube channel, Comics on the Pyre, for other videos like this one. While there, make sure to tap on that bell icon to be notified when the next video drops. But in the interim, as always, until next time, keep reading, my friends.